up for Matt Gross.
30 years and 1 day after the fall of Saigon, I found myself at a goat restaurant near the Ho Chi Minh City airport. It was just about noon, and I was with my friend Quang. It was about, I don't know, my 10th trip to Vietnam over the past 10 years. And we had eaten a goat hot pot, a sort of bubbling cauldron of pieces of goat and vegetables and various herbs and spices, really delicious. Probably some goat noodles, probably some chunks of fried goat as well. Goat restaurants are actually sort of popular in Vietnam. It may not be the first thing you think of when you think of Vietnamese food, but goat is a big deal. Goat, what do I say about goat? When you turn 35 in Vietnam, you enter your goat year. Your goat year is the year that you get laid a lot. If you're in Vietnam, you're 35 years old, and you tell people this, they'll go, oh. So there's all these goat restaurants to sort of fill the need for goat meat and make men virile. I don't know why I was eating goat meat on my last day in Vietnam before I was about to fly back to New York, but there I was with Quang, eating our goat hot pot, and I was looking at the menu and trying to think of what else we might want to get. And I saw on the menu that they had a kind of grilled goat. It was grilled goat breast. And I thought, oh, this sounds kind of good. Grilled food in Vietnam is generally very good. You usually cook it on a little sort of volcano grill and on your table right in front of you. And so I asked Glenn if we could get this. And he is an old friend of mine. He said, sure. And he called the waiter over. We ordered this grilled goat breast. Brought this volcano, which just had these, I mean, it's made of clay, it has these tubular pieces of charcoal in it, it's just emanating heat, it has a little tiny metal grill on top of it. And then they brought this little plate of marinated pieces of goat breast, little rectangles of goat breast marinated in, I don't know, it was sort of orangish, so there must have been some turmeric in it. And we started grilling these pieces of goat breast on a little volcano, just the two of us. 2 or 3 hours before my flight home. And as we cooked the goat breast and gave it a nice char, these were beautiful little pieces of meat. And as I started to eat it, I realized that it was really, really not good. I like goat. I like the gamey flavor of goat. But this was sort of beyond the pale. This was pure goat gaminess. This was like the flavor of a satyr sort of combined into one little rectangle of just fat, of just absolute fat. And I realized as I ate slice after slice that this wasn't the meat from the outside of the rib cage of the goat. This was goat boob. This was goat, not goat breast, but goat breasts. Sliced up into little rectangles and just totally fatly grilled, and it was terrible. It was I didn't know it then, but it would be the worst thing that I'd ever eaten. And I'd eaten a lot of terrible things. When I went to Vietnam for the first time back in 1996, within a week I'd been invited over to someone's house. A professor who would wind up giving me my first job in Vietnam, and served duck fetus. Duck fetus is another popular food in Vietnam. Usually, it's they take these eggs and they fertilize them, and they let them develop for 3 to 6 weeks. Usually, they boil them, and then school kids buy these on the way to school and crack them open and scoop out the semi-developed fetus inside. But for some reason, my friend, this professor, back in 1996, had decided to serve me scrambled duck fetus. Which, I mean, it was on the plate, and it was, I mean, it was a duck fetus. It looked like a little duck. It was sort of like laid out in a little circle of scrambled egg. And yet, I'd eaten that. I had eaten that when 10 years earlier, I had eaten this stuff without too much complaint, and yet compared to that, the grilled goat boob was so much worse than anything I could have imagined. And in between those things, and after those things, I continued to eat a lot of just ridiculously weird and terrible foods. Stinky tofu in in Taiwan, which is a sort of rotten, deep-fried tofu, pig's blood popsicles, various insects, a lot of really unusual kinds of food. I was working as the frugal traveler for the New York Times, and so I was going places where they were A, very cheap, and B, I didn't have a lot of money, and so, yeah, I'm gonna eat bugs. That's great, that works, that fits in my budget. And yet I kept thinking about these goat boobs. Because as I put slice after slice into my mouth, I realized that this was not what I wanted to be doing. And yet there was really no way to stop because I was with Quang. Quang was a guy I met at the place I first lived in Ho Chi Minh City, the former Saigon, in 1996. He was the brother of Lucy, whose hotel I was living in. It was called the Lucy Hotel. Quang was the front desk clerk and the sweetest guy I'd ever met. Just sunny, enthusiastic, cheerful. He played piano. He just had this absolutely sunny outlook on life. And I would hang out with him whenever I could. Whether it was riding his collection of vintage motorbikes from the 40s and 50s and 60s, or showing up at his, eventually showing up at his company dinner. He wound up owning a company that made spare parts for motorbikes because that's what you do when you're an up-and-comer in Vietnam. You start a company that makes like random electrical valves for Chinese-made motorbikes. So I'd hang out with him anytime I could, anytime I went back to Vietnam. And he was always excited to see me. I think he didn't have that many people to speak English with. And I was his like foreign friend. I was like his first foreign friend and his most persistent foreign friend. And so I had to keep eating this goat breast, which was just, it was terrible. But eventually, luckily that day, I had a flight to catch and I could leave Vietnam. And so I left, came back to New York, spent some time in Ohio, and then randomly 6 months later I wound up going back to Vietnam. Saw various friends in Vietnam, went out to dinner with many different people, and of course got in touch with Quang. He'd been through some ups and downs. He'd gotten married, gotten divorced, had a kid, gained weight, lost weight, went out to dinner, and went to another grill restaurant. Not purely a goat restaurant. Grill restaurants are all over southern Vietnam. They're great. You have your little dangerous volcano on your table. You get things like marinated beef. You get pieces of okra. You get various endangered songbirds that are kept in cages near the bathrooms. And we were there. We were having a great meal. Another friend of ours was there, and it was wonderful. And then Quang turned and said something to call over the waitress. And ordered the goat breast again. It had been 6 months, and he remembered that it was the one thing that I picked off the menu from before, and that he thought that I'd liked. And I was just paralyzed at that moment. There was nothing I could say to him. I couldn't tell him that I didn't like this thing, because he had become, over the years, my kind of unofficial older brother. In Vietnam, there's all kinds of these unofficial hierarchical relationships. He was the guy who I'd always seen every visit. We'd always hung out together. He was, half a dozen years older than me. He looked after me, taking care of me. He was my older brother. There's no way in Vietnam to really say no to your older brother, whether he is your biological older brother or the guy who's just become your older brother over time. And so he brought out the goat breast. We grilled them on the table on this little volcano, tried not to burn ourselves. And I ate a slice of this grilled goat breast, and before putting it in my mouth, I had hoped that it was merely the poor culinary approach of the previous restaurant that had made me hate it so much. That they'd done something wrong, that there'd been old goat breast, that they had gotten the seasoning is wrong, that place near the airport was just pitiful compared to this great new grill restaurant. And yet I put that piece of goat booby in my mouth. And I bit down, and it was even worse than it had been before. And yet I had to chew and smile and swallow. And luckily there's a lot of beer around, so we said cheers to each other and drank beer and tried to wash just that fatty, gamey flavor out of my mouth, this flavor that just sort of fills up your whole head. And I couldn't, of course, stop at one bite. I had to eat another one. I had to eat another one. There's no way that I could tell him at that point that I could reject him, because we were talking about rejection here. There's no way I could tell him that without absolutely insulting him. And I was only in Vietnam for a week or two at that trip, and yet there would be more trips to come. Every trip, I realized at that point. Every visit to Vietnam, every year or two, every 3 years, I was going to have to see him. And we would go to a grill restaurant, or a goat restaurant, or some restaurant. There would be some way that he would find to order grilled goat boobs and feed them to me. And know for him that this was his connection to me, his memory with the fact that I loved this dish, that I hated more than anything that I had ever eaten, that I decided I never wanted to eat again, and yet would always have to eat again and again for as long as I would go back to Vietnam, which would hopefully be for the rest of my life, so that I could eat everything else that was great in Vietnam, and see all my good friends like Quang himself. And so I kept eating it, and eating it. And when I was not in Vietnam, I mean, which was most of the time, I live here and I traveled to all these other places, I would eat other things that I thought might be worse. You know, the stewed bear meat in Bucharest. Again with, you know, these pink blood popsicles in Taiwan, which I actually kind of quite like, and would be very happy to have one right now. Hoping that if I could find something that was only worse than this, that I would be able to bear the horror of having to eat this again. That I could find some way not to insult one of my oldest and dearest friends in Vietnam. And now here's where this story sort of has to take a sort of strange turn, because I have not been back to Vietnam having yet found something worse. I haven't been back there in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, so I don't have the closure to this story yet. And yet, I had hoped this morning to have found the one food that, if I was lucky, would sort of erase the memory of the grilled goat boobs from my life and enable me to have this comfortable friendship with my unofficial older brother, Quang, again. This morning, I found myself in Soho, on Spring Street, outside the Dominique Ansel Bakery, looking at a very long line for cronuts. I had not eaten a cronut. They emerged 2 months ago. And at work the other day, I got an email from Crane.tv, some nebulous web TV producer, asking if I, as the editor of BonAppetit.com, wanted to comment on the cronut phenomenon, and I sort of left at the opportunity because it meant that I would not have to stand in line for a cronut. And then also because I knew that this was coming up, and I thought, hey, maybe this is my chance, and I'll eat the cronut and it'll be so like awful and disgusting that, you know, it can purge the memory of the goat boobs. And so at 8:30 this morning, staring at everybody else in line for the cronut, I had a producer deliver me croissant dough shaped into an O, deep fried, covered with cream and sugar and blackberry jam syrup stuff and lime zest. And I was really so hoping that it was going to be awful. But that thing was really good.